John's not an expert on genocide. The actual genocide experts, the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, says Gaza is a genocide. The leading Israeli scholars of the Holocaust, Omer Bartov-Brown, Amos Goldberg at Hebrew University, say Gaza is a genocide. John's not an expert on targeting terrorists. The guy who led the attack on ISIS, the American Master Sergeant Wes Bryant, has said John doesn't know what he's talking about. So let's not play this credentials game, because John will lose, just like Douglas did on the Rogan show.
Welcome back, everyone. Mehdi Hasan is back on the Piers Morgan show, opening up a can of warpath, and this time he annihilates John Spencer, who is the chair of urban warfare studies. I find it extremely hilarious that someone like John is meant to be some sort of an expert on urban warfare, and looking back at his previous debates, I really don't think he brings any value to the discussion. Let's take a look.
Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister in the Israeli government, said this week, "We are there to conquer, cleanse, and remain." Those are his words. "We are disassembling Gaza," he said. "We are leaving it as piles of rubble." He says, "We're doing something that no one's done in the world before." He bragged out loud, and he said, yes, the Gazans will have to leave. So all of those things are stuff some of us were saying last year. I wish we hadn't been vindicated in this horrific way. The killing is ongoing. The starvation is ongoing. And look, I do hope that a dam is bursting. You mentioned the genocide word. Shmuel Lederman, who is an Israeli researcher of genocide, spent much of 2024 saying it's not a genocide, it's not a genocide. He was interviewed by a Dutch newspaper last week. He said, "I've changed my position. It is a genocide." He said, "In my field, there's a consensus among genocide scholars that it's a genocide." In fact, that Dutch newspaper interviewed 7 leading scholars of genocide. Every single one said, "We think what's happening in Gaza is a genocide." In fact, this week, Piers, you have an Israeli former general, Yair Golan, saying a sane country does not attack civilians, does not kill babies as a hobby, and does not expel civilian populations. That is Yair Golan, the former deputy chief of the Israeli military, prominent Israeli politician. He was a hero on October the 7th, fought Hamas himself on October the 7th. This is what he said this week.
Genocide experts from the US, UK, Australia, Croatia, Canada and Israel unanimously call it a genocide. The public can say or think what it likes about October the 7th. What is happening now and what has been happening is a genocide, said so by genocide experts themselves. There's no possible justification or explanation. There's no excuse. There's no ifs or buts. It is a genocide. And the more people accept that now, the quicker we can move forward. Let's take a look at Spencer's response.
So you've been kind of pulling a lot of faces there. You obviously don't agree. But given that so many allies of Israel are now raising massive alarm bells about what is happening, you can't be comfortable, surely, with what is going on in Gaza, are you?
Absolutely not. I think it's horrible. I think there are people suffering. I just am not misinformed on who is the cause of that suffering, that it isn't Israel, that war isn't a crime. War should be avoided at all costs, and Israel did that. And this war didn't start 75 years ago. This war started on October 7th when Hamas invaded Israel and tried to destroy and actually did genocidal acts. I agree that there's a lot of suffering happening in Gaza, and it's the list of people who are responsible. Israel's not on it in my list. Hamas is on it, and I actually have solutions. You asked Mehdi for a solution. I have solutions based on the history of war. Number one solution is to encourage Egypt to open the gate that they control and create a humanitarian zone. Let every woman, child, and elderly person out of Gaza. Just like you and I have discussed in the past about Ukraine. 5 million women, children, elderly left Ukraine to escape Russia's evil bombardments. That could be done today, and it's criminal that it hasn't happened today. Now, Mehdi uses experts, although I thought, credentialism and expert theory was a bad thing today. I've been on the ground, although I've heard that that's a bad thing as well. And what's missing here is, again, which is why I was shaking my head, is that you believe, based on statements of politicians that are not the actual government and the decision makers of the institution, that Israel is intentionally causing this harm. That's false as well. Point the finger at Hamas, as you've said in the past, Piers, and I'm sorry we've lost you. Maybe you and I can go to Gaza because it's not true.
This man is a chief of warfare and doesn't even know the definition of a genocide. He goes on to talk about the suffering in Gaza and states Israel is not responsible. Who's killed 70,000+ innocent men, women and children? Did Hamas kill 70,000 of their own people? It was Israel. It's an absolute joke that he thinks Hamas is responsible for that. The one that's responsible is the one that's pulled the trigger, and it was Israel that pulled the trigger and ended the lives of so many innocent souls. His solution, chief of warfare, is to empty the lands of Gaza. What a pathetic excuse of a man. If that happens, the whole of Gaza will be completely destroyed, making it uninhabitable. People will not be allowed to come back, and Trump and Netanyahu will resume building this new version of Gaza, creating and developing resorts to fill their own pockets.
John has been on the ground in Gaza, as an embed. I love it when John and Douglas Murray and these people say, oh, we've been on the ground in Gaza. As guests of the Israeli military that's doing the killing, starving and maiming, and you've come back and done exactly what they wanted to do. You've done done their propaganda for them. Journalists have not been allowed freely into Gaza. That's why every major media organization on planet Earth has said to the Israeli government, you must allow journalists in. The Palestinian journalists who are there have been killed in record numbers. Of course, Piers, you're right. They want to hide what they're doing. That's why they're killing the journalists there and blocking the journalists from coming in. This idea that he's been on the ground. Yeah, I did interview a doctor, a British plastic surgeon, Dr. Tom Patoka. And by the way, he wasn't in the European hospital because the hospital got bombed by Israel. So he was in another hospital, and he talked to me about how he has to treat patients who have maggots in their wounds. He has to treat patients without limbs. He has to treat children. I've interviewed multiple doctors on the ground in Gaza, actually in Gaza, not hanging around with Israeli military. And they've all said the same thing. American doctors, British doctors, Canadian doctors. They've all talked about how many kids they saw with sniper bullets to the head and chest. Israel does intentionally kill civilians. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant were indicted at the International Criminal Court for precisely those charges, for willful killing of Palestinians, for murder and persecution. That's why they've been indicted. That's why every human rights group in the world says war crimes are being committed. They've killed people holding white flags. We've seen it with our own eyes. They've bombed buildings without warning with families inside, like the Al-Dos family that I often cite in October 2023. They've dropped 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps full of hundreds of people. They have killed 7 aid workers in a clearly marked World Central Kitchen aid convoy. They've bombed World Food Programme convoys, leading to Cindy McCain, the wife of the most pro-Israeli senator of my lifetime, to come out and condemn Israel for attacking aid workers. John wants you to ignore Cindy McCain and British and American doctors and human rights groups and your own lying eyes watching people with white flags being gunned down. He wants you to believe him and his Israeli military minders.
Okay, Mehdi, before we go back to John to respond to that,
162 journalists have been killed, 1,400 healthcare workers, 0 hospitals in Gaza are fully operational. According to Save the Children charity, all schools in Gaza have been closed for all 695,000 students. That's because almost 90% of schools have been destroyed, 60% of all Gaza buildings destroyed, and this Spencer has the audacity to show his smug face and defend Israel. Check out this next clip how John Spencer, don't ever forget this man's name, talks about how he thinks Israel should have responded.
Now, you didn't ask me the question of what Israel should have done, because I actually teach urban warfare at this scale. I've actually studied the history of urban warfare from Stalingrad to Fallujah, Mosul, Mawar, you name it. And when I said those statements on Time Radio, if the world would have allowed Israel to continue, 5 divisions going heavy against Hamas, moving civilians out of harm's way, we'd be in a different place. And this hypocrisy of the numbers, right? So there's 3 types of lies, damn lies, and statistics. There's been 85,000 children under the age of 5 who have died from starvation in Yemen since the Yemen civil war. I don't see protests and I don't see daily coverage on what's going on in Yemen. Had the world not stopped Israel back when they said, don't go to Rafah. You can't use big bombs against people in tunnels. This is crazy on what we're setting the standard for. This Israeli standard for war, if it continues, any nation trying to defend itself after being an attempted actual genocide against its people won't be able to. So I'm saying that Israel has done more to protect civilians in war, even when Hamas, who uses human sacrifice, is trying to get civilians killed. And they say this isn't John Spencer's word. Israel's done more to protect civilians than any other military in any comparable situation.
You're right. Why are so many of Israel's allies now turning on Israel? Why is the UK calling it morally unjustifiable? Why is the UK, France and Canada combined to say they strongly oppose the expansion of Israel's military operations in Gaza? The level of human suffering is intolerable. Donald Trump didn't even visit Netanyahu when he went to the Middle East for the week. I mean, Mehdi articulated earlier, which is after 9/11, which was the worst attack on American mainland since anyone could remember, that after that, they did launch a massive bombardment of Afghanistan. And where did that get America?
Yep.
In the end, it got America to a place where it left with its tail between its legs, with a load of people being killed on live television, horrific scenes, a betrayal of many people who had helped America during that war. And you cannot point to that and say there was any great victory. And this is the problem with what's going on in Gaza now. What does victory now look like? Because it's not going to lead to the removal of Hamas as an entity. And it looks like support for Hamas has grown, not deteriorated. So I don't understand what victory looks like other than what Smodrich has been saying, which is actually what it looks like is all the Palestinians gone. That Israel go in, clear them out, and they take over the land. Well, that, I'm afraid, whether you like it or not, John, is actually one of the definitions of a genocide, the expulsion of a people based on his ethnicity. Mehdi, your response?
This guy can stick his credentials up his backside. I'm 100% convinced he doesn't even know anything about warfare. His war tactics is simple: kill, kill, kill. According to him, there's no other way. I'm glad Piers gave him a big old slap in the face and reminded him of the definition of a genocide. Let's hear from Mehdi.
Yeah, a lot's been said there. Thank you for coming back to me. First of all, let me just deal with this credentials game that I know John and his friend Douglas Murray love to play these days about military, who knows more about this or that. John runs his mouth on a variety of topics. I've seen him talk about, in fact, just today he's talked about war crimes, international law, who's breaking international law. Last time I checked, John is not a lawyer. The International Criminal Court has indicted Netanyahu and Gallant for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The former Jewish president of the tribunals for Yugoslavia and Rwanda says Netanyahu should be indicted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. So let's just, we're going to play the expert game. John's not an expert on genocide. The actual genocide experts, the president of the International Association of Genocide Scholars, says Gaza is a genocide. The leading Israeli scholars of the Holocaust, Omer Bartov-Brown, Amos Goldberg at Hebrew University, say Gaza is a genocide. John's not an expert on targeting terrorists. The guy who led the attack on ISIS, the American Master Sergeant Wes Bryant, has said John doesn't know what he's talking about. So let's not play this credentials game, because John will lose, just like Douglas did on the Rogan show. Let's talk about substance. John said a year ago, we're close to winning. He talked about not being allowed into Rafah. Rafah has been destroyed. Have you looked at any pictures recently? It's flattened. You don't need to go there with the IDF to see that they flattened Rafah. They flattened most of Gaza, and they still have not won, quote unquote. It's absurd to say that Israel was held back. Is this the new stab in the back? This is the new bullshit defense. The former Israeli ambassador to the United States said recently, thank God Joe Biden was president while this was going on. He gave us everything we wanted. He never asked us to stop. He never asked for a ceasefire. America gave Israel everything it wanted, and they went ahead and decided to, you talk about killing Hamas commanders, they dropped two 2,000-pound bombs on October the 31st, 2023, on the Jabalia refugee camp, killing over 100 people to kill one guy, Ibrahim Biari, who wasn't even there, a Hamas commander. They killed over 100 people with two 2,000-pound bombs, which incinerate everyone within 100 square feet and damage everyone within 1,000 square feet. That is not targeted welfare. That is not proportionate. That is not legal. And we've seen that play out now over 20 months. And as you said at the start of the show, as I said, the dam is breaking. The Spanish Prime Minister has said Israel is a genocidal state. The Brits, the French, the Canadians that have backed everything Israel done, Britain continues to arm Israel, are saying this is intolerable. Donald Trump, as you've said, Piers, wants this done, wants this over, isn't a fan of Netanyahu. Not that I have any trust in Trump to do any of the right thing. And I think the reality is, look, everyone can see with their own eyes, there's no justification ever for starving people. Since March the 2nd, to not allow baby formula and diapers in, only a sociopath would support that. And John's very smart, he's very eloquent, he comes on here, he talks with stats, cites law. Back in Israel, the Israeli politicians and the Israeli journalists are saying openly genocidal things. They are saying everyone in Gaza is our enemy. They are saying we're going to get rid of everyone from Gaza. They are saying Gazan babies are not innocent. That's what they say on Israeli television, if anyone bothers to watch.
I disagree with Mehdi on one point. I don't think Spencer is smart or eloquent at all, and I don't think he stated any facts either. Apart from sharing the same old BS, he gave us nothing new and splitted the same old crap. Anyway guys, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Support me by liking and subscribing. I'll see you in my next video. Peace out.